welcome to Hindu Lounge. This is Hindu Lounge. Hindu Lounge is brought to you by Hindu Pact. Hindu Pact is Hindu Policy Research and Advocacy Collective. Hindu Pact, one of the most premium Hindu advocacy organizations. Today, we come live and we are going to talk about the Pahalgam terrorist attacks. It's a somber day. It's a day when over 28 people have been killed, many more are seriously injured and in the hospital. As you all probably know, there was a terrorist attack in Kashmir, in which is a beautiful resort place. And when that attack took place, the innocent tourists, unsuspecting as they were sitting, having their snacks, one of the victims said that they were having bail and her husband was pulled over. Husband was asked if he was a Muslim or a Hindu. There are reports that people were made to take down their pants and they were inspected to see if they're Hindus or Muslims. They were asked to say azan to verify their identity, and then from there they were identified as Hindus and they were killed. It has been a while since Kashmir has seen this kind of brutality. And so we have gathered today a set of experts. But before I go to our experts and introduce them, I want to welcome Sudha Jagannathan. Sudha is the co host of Hindu Lounge. She is an amazing, tireless Hindutva worker, a volunteer who has worked for many, many years now on Hindu causes across the country. Sudha, welcome, and I'll give you the floor. But before that, let me quickly introduce Rahul ji and Surinder ji. Rahul Surji is a former IPS officer. He has been in charge of US peacekeeping forces thing as well. He's worked with the United Nations for several years, and he heads up the Hindus Advancing Human Rights Initiative of Hindu Pact. Also with us today is Surinder Dharji, who is a relentless worker for the Hindu cause, and he has been working on human rights causes for a long time. He is vice president of the Atlanta chapter of VHP America, and also he's involved with our Hari initiative. So welcome, Ji, welcome Rahul ji. But first, Sudha, over to you as you give your opening remarks.
Yeah. Thank you, Ajay. And great to meet you both. Of course, we have met Rahulji and Ji. As Ajay mentioned, today is a very heartrending day. It's like a never ending assault on Hindus. And it's actually more disturbing because the attacks in Kashmir is relentless, right? We thought things had settled down in Kashmir. We thought tourism was booming, economic development was happening, and we think that everything is okay. But it's not okay because our neighbors on both sides now. But let's focus on the western border. The neighbor there, Pakistan, is intent on killing India by the thousand cuts because an all out war, they know they will never win. And so this kind of attack, and also on innocent people, people who have taken time to just have a good time in a beautiful part of India, and then they attack, and the vicious and the brutish ways in which they decide who to kill. I just don't have any more words to talk about it. I think we are in a very big crisis, the Hindus of the world. We may be a billion people, but we are not all in one place, thank goodness. And then somebody will bomb us and destroy us with one shot. But the fact that we have to sit in different places and see what is going on and not able to be there to hold their hands, I have to say, I'm really heartbroken.
So let's bring in Ji. You are from Kashmir. You have already seen terrorism firsthand because you have experienced this firsthand in the 90s, right? When the terrorism first took roots.
Yeah, first let me show my sympathies to all the people who are impacted by this. I have gone through all the emotions that I went way back in January of 1990 when I was in Kashmir. And one of my close friends was killed by another known person, a Kashmiri militant. And then I had to run away in the dead of the night. Satish Tikku was the name of my friend. And he was knocked at his door, and his sister thought is a friend of his because we used to play cricket together. And she said, "Oh, you're looking for Satish? Let me set him down." So he came out of the door and he was shot point blank range. And of course, then I had to leave in the dead of the night. 35 years have passed almost 35 years, and nothing seems to have changed. The mindset of Islamic radicals is still the same. They are actually expanding their footprint in India and around the world. We have incidents of Islamic terrorists, even though our US media would like to paint them as a mental health problem or this, but we know what has happened when they have used their vehicles as weapons in Germany, here in US, and everywhere else. It is it's not a problem of India only, it's the problem of the whole world. And it's time that we take this seriously. I would like to say that the October, what was it, 7, when the Israel was attacked, I think we should take a leaf out of the book from Bibi Netanyahu and treat this problem sternly with a firm hand. I'll stop here and then we'll continue our
Let
discussion.
me bring Rahulji. There is an organization now. You head up the Hindus Advancing Human Rights, which is a genuine human rights initiative by Hindu Pact, where we truly speak on the issues that are affecting the fundamental rights of Hindus. There's an organization which pretends to be a human rights organization, pretends to be a Hindu organization, and it's called Hindus for Human Rights. There's nothing Hindu about that organization. They sent out a tweet earlier a few hours ago, and they said this is what they wrote in their tweet. I'm going to read it, and I'll get your reaction, and then I'll give the floor to you to talk about other issues that you may have on your mind. They said a tragic attack in Pahalgam has left many dead and injured, an act of violence that demands mourning and reflection. While the full story is still unfolding, some are already framing it through communal lens. This moment calls for care, not division. Now, I started by saying that there were people were asked, and for their religion, they were asked to verify that they are not Muslims before they were called. And here is an organization that purports to be a human rights organization, and then they are saying instead of calling a spade, they are saying that this is not a communal attack. What do you say to an organization like that and people who listen to them?
So, first of all, to you and to fellow panelists and to all the people who have suffered and everybody in India, today is a very dark day in the manner in which the attack was carried out and the toll which it took and the sheer implications of this and the questions which it raises. Now, coming to your question about this tweet about these people, Hindus for human rights, this is a very dishonest statement and it is aimed at nothing else except covering up the real reasons and the real perpetrators of this crime. So, when the motivation by these perpetrators has been so clearly and blatantly and cruelly displayed, in which they have asked them their religion and they have taken the pants of the men down to see whether they are Hindu or Muslim, the idea is to inflict violence across religious lines on Hindus specifically. And therefore, the identity of the perpetrators and the identity of the victims is of central importance in this. And consequently, this is a fraudulent organization, and this is nothing but a cover up. And essentially, it should be seen through for what it is. It is an organization. It is, in fact, playing into the hands of precisely those people who carried it out. Now, whether they're doing it deliberately or whether they're doing it, whether they don't know, I cannot say. But even the most charitable view of these people will show that they are perpetrating an absolute lie. And it was an incident which was deliberately done in which Hindus were targeted. And in that sense, from the point of view of the perpetrators, it is communal.
Yeah, President Trump came up with a very strong statement today condemning the terrorist attack in Kashmir. Do you have any? And I'll read that. I'll read the statement. Everyone will get context here. Let me bring that statement up. He basically called it deeply disturbing news. And it was very extensive statement. I'll read that statement. But do you have any comments on what President Trump had to say? Vice President Vance issued a statement, what he had to say. And maybe you can put that in context of how the CIRF is portraying India.
I thank President Trump and Vice President Vance for coming out strongly condemning what happened today. They did it right away. No waiting around, no checking with the usual buddies of their Pakistani friends or anybody. I'm so glad that the government of the United States came out really strong against this conduct, this particular incident. That is needed because the world really is starting to see what Pakistan is all about and Islamic radicalization and the Islamist brutality that's not only in Asia but in Europe and in the US. Pretty much the biggest violence on US soil has had an Islamist hand in it, as we have seen several of these actions happening. And everybody talks about that particular statement you read out from Hindus for Human Rights. They are not helping anyone, especially themselves. You cannot say what they said and try to be friends or try to do this balancing act. There is no balancing act in this kind of action. This is an example of a pattern of behavior worldwide. This is not a one off, exact blueprint happening in various parts of India. In the north, in the south, in the east, in the west of India. It's happening in Pakistan against the minorities, happening against the minorities in Bangladesh. It's happening in Europe. It is the same blueprint. They have mastered this blueprint on how to execute it at the trigger of any kind of reason. And I don't think we can just excuse this kind of behavior. This has gone on for a long time. Of course, India has suffered this a lot longer than Europe and US. And we have recognized this thing for a long time. But the world has come to the same understanding of what Islamist violence is all about. I think a global consensus that nobody should tolerate this. Everybody can have their faith. We are not saying somebody should not be this faith or that faith. No. But you cannot use faith to champion some kind of ideology and kill people. These Kashmir and West Bengal right now are the killing fields where Hindus are the victims. And we have to call it out. This is Islamic jihadi violence. Okay? And there is no question about it. There are many very good Indian Muslims calling this out. And they are warning India to take this seriously. And that is my question also to the nation of India. Of course, we are US citizens, but we have roots in India. My question to the Indian government is how long are you going to sit there and watch this happen and let it pass? What about your duty, your dharma to your own citizens and people of the country? Even any guests who come to the country, you are obligated to ensure their safety and security. And when this happens again and again, you are failing your own people. And that is sad to see. I hope they do something about it.
Completely agree. Here is a full statement that was issued by President Trump. He said that deeply disturbing news out of Kashmir. The United States stands strong with India against terrorism. And he continues on to say, we pray for the souls of those lost and for the recovery of the injured. Prime Minister Modi and the incredible people of India have our full support and deepest sympathies. Our hearts are with you all. Surindarji, I'll go to you next. Have you had a chance to connect with some friends, family who are in Kashmir, in Jammu, in Delhi today? And what is their reaction? What are their thoughts?
Before I go to that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the District 6, our local congressman, Dr. Rich McCormick, who has condemned this incident. He is also head of the India caucus in the US Congress. So thank you so much. And also the Department of State has come, the condemnation has come from all over. But we need to go a step further than this. We really have to have action, which we are going to discuss later. But yeah, I did have a chance to talk to a few people. Everybody is frustrated. We have been suffering from 35 years now. A lot of the people have recovered, but then something happens and emotional trauma comes back. So that's the state. People are frustrated, angry, and in great despair. A lot of people had recently thought that things might return to normal, and we're thinking of going back. And in fact, we were planning heritage tour from here, US, in October this year. And with this thing happening now, we might have to rethink about it, because we don't want to go to a place where this sudden attack can happen. By the way, I don't know whether some news reports are saying most of the people who were killed, now the death toll has gone up to 30. And most of the people actually who were killed were from IB, who were from the law enforcement and army people who were vacation there. And this place is called the mini Switzerland of Kashmir. This is about 2.5 miles from Pahalgam. Pahalgam is about 55 miles from Srinagar. So it's not a long distance from the capital. But so this is a failure at multiple levels of the governance. Of course, former Abdullah, who is the current chief minister, is directly responsible for it. And then also the federal government, where the agencies have failed to identify this threat. Now, they should have been aware of this. This is not an isolated incident. As Ji was saying, this is happening in Bangladesh, this is happening in West Bengal. And then the recent statements by the army chief of Pakistan were alarming, where he has openly said that Hindus have no place in Islamic world. And for him, the Islamic world means the whole world. Now, he has targeted Hindus, but they have targeted Christians at other places. It's not just the Hindus. It is Islamic radicals on one side and everybody else on the other side. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Okay, let me ask you this question. I think one of the things that has been a little bit different over the last 10 years is that India has responded, right? So the Pulwama attacks took place in 2019, and India gave a robust response to that. At least a couple of times when the attacks have happened, India decisively acted either by crossing the border by land or crossing the border by air and teaching the terrorists the lesson they deserve and punishing them for the terrorist act that they carried out against humanity and again, especially against Hindus. It is not that Indian government is not doing anything. In last two major instances, Indian government did act. Should they be doing more? Of course, they should be doing more. The question is, what should they be doing? And so, my question for you is, what are the realistic steps that the government of India can take in order to make sure that these terrorists think many times before acting the way they did?
So in this case, Ajayji, I think that's a very good question about what is going to be the response of the government of India. What should be the response of the government of India? Now, obviously, the first response has to be that these people have to be found and they have to be neutralized. And therefore, the entire operation has to be directed in that way so that they know whether the threat is still alive, whether it is still hiding. Now, keep in mind that this is not right directly on the borders. Therefore, they have come inside, they were on foot, they escaped, they were in army uniforms, and consequently, it is not a wild supposition to say that they would have had some local support. So that is one critical question. And the other thing which you said is what should be the response of the government of India, right? Now, in this sense, the public outrage in this is so much. And I don't think that the government can overlook this and say this is something which we are going to be satisfied only by neutralizing the perpetrators. So if the perpetrators have been neutralized, then the question is, what can we do if the link with Pakistan, and certainly the link will have been established, I think, because the indiscriminate way in which they have carried it out means that the local tourist industry is going to be very badly affected, and consequently, the locals are also going to be affected economically. Obviously, the world is going to say, here are these two nuclear superpowers, they're on the brink of conflict again, etc., etc. And the possibilities of miscalculation in this are immense. So if you go up the escalation ladder, what are you going to do? Are you going to restrict it to, for instance, the bombardments or gunfire across the border where you think they are? Are you going to go inside? What exactly are you going to do? So this is something which is very tricky, but no action is not an option. And consequently, given the belligerent statements which have been made by Asim Munir, the Chief of Army Staff in Pakistan. Clearly, Pakistan is in a very difficult position because they are having a lot of problems on the Western Front. And the speech which he gave to the Pakistani diaspora was meant to rally them in this collective cry of hatred against India, against Hindus. And therefore, certainly radical elements which exist in plenty in Pakistan have infiltrated India. But there will have to be a response, whether it is the border, and they will have to also have to be a punitive response if it is to mean anything. Because unless we do something, this is going to be considered a bad step for the government. And this has clearly been an intelligence failure. And I was getting telephone calls from Jammu this morning, and they have not been very complimentary about the way it has been handled, because essentially what has happened is a lot of money is flowing in and out there, and the Hindu voices out there have been silenced. And therefore, by them removing or reducing the army from there also, I suppose they wanted to give the impression that normalcy has returned. But it cannot be that normalcy returns so fast, because these people are determined, they are deadly, and they are motivated by an ideology. And we have to look at the ideology itself. We have to separate the facets of the ideology which lead this kind of thing to happen all over the world. So this is not something which is happening only now. It has happened for a long time. It happened when at the creation of Pakistan. In Bangladesh, we see it in, let us forget that this year opened with a terrorist attack on New Orleans in the United States. So we have to look upon it as a global threat, as a local threat, as a regional threat, and we will have to be very strong, very unsentimental about responding to it, because the only language they understand is strength and force.
Thank you, Rahulji. So what do you expect the US government to do?
Pakistan is already called a country of particular concern, CPC, and the USCIRF is constantly trying to put India in the same bucket. I'm hoping USCIRF gets a good kick in the behind in the new administration. But my point is that what else can they do? First of all, call out that army chief terrorist, okay? A person of particular concern. And it should be done by both India and United States and all of his top lieutenants. And they strip all their visas. And I think India should then sue those people for monetary, punitive damages, because this is the only thing that would actually get them to pay any attention. They don't have money. Army has money, but the country doesn't have money. But you still have to send them a message saying, we are going to take this seriously. You're going to pay for all of this stuff. And I don't know, there must be some way of freezing their assets and whatnot, wherever they are in the world, and really making them pay. I know that a lot of these terrorist leaders have been taken out, and there is some references that maybe India is doing it. Somebody is doing it, right? And that is emboldening these people. See, the ones who are coming and attacking and perpetrating this one, they are not afraid of dying. They want to die, right? Because they get whatever in heaven. And that is the only goal. So even in death, they get rewarded. So I'm just telling you, this will be like the Rakta Bija. Each drop of blood will bring out more of these people. How do you put a lid on the whole thing? The whole world needs to work on it together, because these terrorists from the Rakta Bija is impacting and infiltrating the whole democratic systems everywhere and using that to turn the world towards their ideology. This is very insidious, okay? We are just looking at one thing happening in India, which is terrible. Happens again and again. But there is a lot of this insidious stuff going on in India and around the world. I think that needs to be stopped. I'm not an expert on these things. I'm just disgusted that they are able to get away with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be. There should be some monetary impact on it, even on a bankrupt state. And India should not be selling them or giving them anything, thinking that in the future we have some good outcomes. I don't think there's anything that is good that's going to come out from these two neighbors we have.
Thank you. Sundaji, I have a question that I want to ask you, and that is, what is the Kashmiri Pandit diaspora in US thinking? What are their sentiments? how do they want the Indian government and the US government to react?
Yes, so let me first take up the Indian government. When this incident happened, the Prime Minister of India, Modi ji, was in Saudi Arabia. Now, was this done deliberately for that purpose? Obviously, J.D. Vance was also there in India. And
They were trying to send a message, that when Vance was there, so it gets the maximum publicity, right?
but what I want to point is that we have seen these incidents happening everywhere, but we have never seen any of the 57 OIC countries ever condemning it. Now it is time for US as well as India to use their diplomatic channels and OIC, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, as it is called, the body of all these countries where they have basically terminated all other nationalities. So they should condemn this. So both US as well as India should use their diplomatic channels, and Saudi Arabia, being the head of the OIC, I don't know whether they are, but it was formed there. So Saudi Arabia has to condemn Islamic radicalism. They have done it a little bit, but they need to do more. This can only be done when the Sufi Islam or the moderate Islam comes out against these radicals. Most of these converts are responsible for this in most of the places. If you see them who follow the real Islam have to come forward and try to be radicalized. I think in Saudi Arabia, they already did some things after the 9/11. And this de-radicalization process has to start. This madrasa system has to be addressed in India. The Indian government has been silent on this. I knew it when I was there in Kashmir. I know how many people radicalized there. And this was through these Duabi Islamic, who were outsiders, not from Kashmir, who radicalized them. There was no radicalization till 70s. It all started when the mullahs came from UP mostly, and that started the radicalization of the people. And the de-radicalization process has to start everywhere, especially in India. So one of the two things that I request government of India is try to address the madrasa systems. They are given public funds to basically radicalize. Now, what do you expect? But India is a strange country that way. You are feeding the people who are going to cut your hands. So that's what is happening. That's one. And then use the diplomatic channels and target the OIC countries and have them come openly against the radical Islam. I'll stop here and we'll continue.
Thank you. Well, Rahulji, you have done a lot of work in terms of original research, and you have also submitted, and we will do a separate show on that. But just to tell our audience that you have done, you led an effort, a multi organizational effort, multi faith effort to put together a whole expose, which then led to a formal complaint to the United Nations about the genocide of minorities, the Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, etc., that is happening in Pakistan today. Now, that is the genocide in Pakistan, but they're doing the same thing in Kashmir in India, and they are instigating the same kind of genocide that's going on in of Hindus. They've already done it in '97 once in East Bengal. They're doing it again in Bangladesh. That is going on in West Bengal right now with Murshidabad killings and all that. So the complaint that we submitted a week or two ago to the United Nations talks about minorities, Hindu minorities and Christian and Sikh minorities in Pakistan. But what about the cross border terrorism, and how does that fit into there? And you alluded to that a little bit, but how does that, what drives them to do those kinds of heinous acts across the border? And what is the recourse that United Nations or some United Nations Human Rights Commission and other agencies, Human Rights Committee, Human Rights organizations have? What kind of leverage they have over Pakistan?
That's a big question, but I'll just take it step by step. Pakistan, the complaint which you submitted, which is a multi-faith, multinational effort, is actually on the grip genocide of Hindus, Christians, and Sikhs. And in that complaint, we have shown the mechanics of the genocide, how they were put together, starting from the ideology on which the country was founded. There is a Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed who was in Sweden, and he says that Pakistan was a country which is born in hatred and is still subsisting on hatred. So, in this complaint, we have chopped out all the mechanics of how they do it. And that has been going on since 1947, since the time of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. It has been said he wanted a secular Pakistan. That is not true. That was only just a one-off speech which he gave during this Constituent Assembly, which is overridden by literally the hundreds of speeches which he gave expressing his Islamic beliefs. You had radicalization through the entire history of Pakistan, including starting much before Zia-ul Haq, whether it has been the destruction of temples, whether it has been a forcible conversion of Hindu girls and women, whether it has been the most successful way it happened is through the seeding of hatred in their textbooks towards Hindus. And we've given the entire evidence which has come from non-Indian sources to show how this country has literally snuffed out its minorities. And even Muslims, for instance, the Ahmadiyya Muslims out there. Now, it is the same ideology which is operating out here, and viewers will know that there has been a seizure in India of a document in which they plan to make India an Islamic country by 1947. And their view is that we owned India before partition, and therefore we owned India at the time of the Mughal rulers, and therefore it has to come back to us. So a very frank analysis has to be done of the ideology which is contained in their religious texts as to the hatred and venom which is spewed against everybody else. And unless we look at the roots of this thing, now in the Middle East, for example, MBS in Saudi Arabia, he is trying a reformulation or a weeding out of some hadiths, right? Because he says that they are the ones which promote hatred. He's also restricted the teaching of the Quran out there to a certain extent because, again, they have gone back to the roots of they think, where is the hatred coming from? In the Middle East, when you have these strong rulers, they restrict terrorism and extremism with a very firm hand because they know that their regimes can be overthrown. And they know where the venom is coming from. The Muslim Brotherhood, for instance, is banned in many places in the Middle East. So here we have to understand what are the roots of this. And the world will slowly come to the realization, I don't know how long it will take, that this ideology has to be studied in the revelations which are there in their book to see what is the kind of hatred which it nurtures towards them. For instance, 98.6 in the Quran Surah says, non-believers are the worst of created creatures. So therefore, are we ready to face up to these kinds of inconvenient facts? And Sudhaji had raised the question that it's happening all over the world. The kind of brutality which was unleashed on the Kashmiri Pandits finds an echo in many other incidents around the world. Whether you have a look at the Armenian genocide, whether you have a look at the Direct Action Day, whether you have a look at what they're doing out here, it is a fact pattern. And unless we acknowledge that fact pattern, we'll just be floundering around in a maze of self-delusion and consequently unable to name the real problem, which goes to their texts, which goes to their provisions, and on which a statistical analysis already been done in terms of how they think about us. So that is the very uncomfortable truth, and I don't know when the world will wake up to it, but perhaps someday it will.
Sudha, let me read this for you because this is the demand that we as Hindu Pact, especially Hindus Advancing Human Rights or Hari initiative that Rahulji leads, these are the 4 demands that we have put out today. The first one is immediate sanction against Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism. The second is a formal designation of Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism by the US government. The third one is a United Nations led inquiry into persecution of Hindus and other minorities in Kashmir. Now, we have to be a little careful because no independent country wants United Nations to do a fact-finding mission over there, but we think that maybe the Indian government and United Nations Human Rights Commission can work some mechanism out where the fact-finding that is happening on the ground gets global recognition. And the fourth one is global recognition of the plight of Kashmiri Hindus and other indigenous communities displaced or targeted by Islamic terror. So these are the four demands that we as Hindu Pact have put out. Now, if you have to give, and I think I asked this in slightly different form, and I'll ask again because you work at the grassroots level. What are the what out some practical steps that if there are a lot of people who are active online. There are a lot of people who are what people would, and I don't mean to denigrate them by calling them WhatsApp warriors because they have important role to play in terms of awakening everyone. So people who are on WhatsApp, people who are on X, people who are on Facebook, people who are on TikTok, and people who are on Instagram and all that online. There are some people who are very active. What advice do you give them? What is it that they can do? Because even in Ramayana, we say that even a squirrel had a role to play. And so if you're sitting in America and your heart is really agitated because you saw this, how Hindus were killed, and you want to do something, what do you do?
Okay, so that's a big question, but I can say a lot of Hindus are now taking small steps. I'll tell you, there was a time when if a Hindu from Kashmiri Hindu tried to speak at one of those teach-ins about Kashmir set up by Pakistani Muslims who claim to be the real Kashmiris, the Hindus would be kicked out. They would be called, this is all nonsense, you are not victims, we are
Now that at Rutgers University, right? They deplatformed one of the speakers, Hindu speakers.
Yes,
there.
we had Vihotri ji at one time. But I want to tell you, things are changing slightly. So this past weekend, the Hindu Yuva and the Hindu Youth Action, the Kona team, sponsored an event on Kashmir. And it was live streamed by Dia TV and of course Kona also. And I'll tell you why it is very important. It was organized and sponsored by non-Kashmiri Hindus. That's important. The larger community is now coming forward. And so nobody can point to the organizing students and say, oh, you are a liar. You are just speaking for or about a thing that didn't happen to you. He doesn't or she doesn't have to be a Kashmiri Hindu at all. This is a global Hindu, American, born and raised here. We need to have more of that. So idea is to encourage our Hindus in America, let's focus on North America, Canada, and the United States, to be bold and come out and speak about the trauma that the Hindus have suffered for centuries. Don't hide these facts. And that's one thing our parents don't really do. We don't tell our stories. I hope, Surinderji, that your family, your children, and grandchildren know your stories. It's important for you to talk about it. And so I'm from the state of Kerala. We have had 100 years ago the Mapula Lehala, which is now characterized as, oh, the protest against landlords or something. It was a planned attack by Islamists and it was perpetrated on Hindus, driven out, and their properties grabbed to this day. The Hindu families can't reclaim it back. So this is the same behavior we have seen everywhere. So what can the diaspora do? Learn. Please don't hide with your head in the sand. I get really concerned that our community doesn't want to learn, doesn't want to hear. They're too happy in their life. You're not going to be happy too long if you hide. You need to come out and participate. Tell your stories in every platform, particular to your children. So the children doing this is very heartening. Now kids want to write papers on it. I am all for it. It allows them to do research, understand, and do it. We want the same thing happening with Hindu kids in India. And there are kids who are going back and learning the history and doing it. So at the ground level, I think we have a hard time motivating a billion Hindus. Let me tell you, it's very hard, right? But it's starting to resonate a little bit at a time, especially when they see the stuff that's happening is not just in India anymore. See, what they say about Las Vegas, what happens in Las Vegas stays there no more. What happens in India comes to the US. It comes after people like you, me, and two guests here. And we have seen many of these actions happening here, sponsored by organizations here that are extremely anti-India and anti-Hindu. We can't just sit there and wait to be hit. And it's going to come. It's going to come. The anti-Hindu hate in North America is only going to escalate. So we better understand that and take action. And part of that is learning our history. And the Kashmiri history is an extremely important part of our knowledge about our people that we cannot afford to ignore. I was glad to see that event happen the other day, and I'm hoping more students speak up. And I can tell you, even recently, a year and a half, when a student tried to do this in a very elite university on the East Coast, she was shut down. They said the Hindu kids in the university called the DEI VP and said, "Oh, I felt uncomfortable." The Hindu students said. Why is that? Because we parents have failed. So we cannot afford to fail anymore. We cannot fail our children. We have to tell our stories. We have been the biggest victims of colonizers and ideology things. And I think Suriji or Surinderji mentioned the manifesto 2047. What does it say? It says they want Islamic India. What does an Islamic India mean? It means you, me, moderate Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Sikhs have no place in it. The same call that they gave to Kashmiri Hindus will be given to everybody, right? Run away or convert or die. Is that the choice? Are those the choices we need to live with? There's a lot to do on all of this stuff, Ajay. And it's not one thing. It's are all interlaced. Everything we are facing in the US is interlaced because if you go back and look at who's behind it, it's always the same group of people. So know your enemy and first start at home. Teach your kids not only to be good Hindus, but also to be safe in America. And we are not anymore. And being safe means knowing the dangers. And it's not like saying, go hate somebody. No, that's not what we are saying.
Right.
We are saying that these are the dangers. These are current dangers. These topics that happen, today's event. Talk to your family, talk to your kids and say, will you tweet out something on this particular thing? Or why do you take sides and never speak on Hindu trauma? That is wrong. You need to condemn all wrongs. And so that's an important lesson for our kids, not to be compassionate, selectively compassionate. You need to be compassionate on many things. And I will tell you again, we raise good kids. We raise very good kids, but we don't teach them to understand that first you take care of yourself, your family, then you take care of your community and your nation, and everybody is happy. But if you don't take care of yourself, then you'll be standing with someone who's never going to be taking care of you.
Thank you. Thanks, Sudha. Final words, Surendraji?
Yeah, I heard the demands. I'm also part of the Global Kashmiri Pandit Diaspora, and we have been trying for a decade to get UN recognize January 1990 as a genocide, Kashmiri genocide. I think if you can add that demand, then that'll we want.
Absolutely. It's our duty to add that.
This,
We
this
definitely
was a genocide because and people were from how many 10 lakh were reduced to few thousand and nobody is there. I think Kona, Hindu Pack and all, we should come out with a protest day, where we can give our memorandum to the State Department and other government departments. Obviously, I'm thinking we have a protest day someday. Let's work towards, let's get the world attention to this problem. Besides all the things that Sudhaji was telling, but we got to make our voice heard and we got to shout. That's how the world listens, unfortunately.
so great. Excellent idea. Thank you, Surendraji. Rahulji, any final thoughts before we close?
Yeah. So I think that this ideology will have to be countered comprehensively. It has to be countered at the security level. It has to be countered at the international level. It has to be countered at the cultural level. Every facet of this ideology, how it conquers and spreads, has to be understood. And therefore, the response has got to be a whole of society response. Obviously, these terrorists have to be neutralized. But as I said, did they have any local help? It is possible. It is more than possible. Has there been any protest by OIC and other Muslim organizations on this? If not, why not? So these are the kinds of questions that you'll have to raise. And we have to do it in a very cool, calm, collected, and determined manner. Because I can tell you one thing, that the threat for India from this ideology is steadily going up. And you cannot respond if you do not understand what is going on at a macro level and at a micro level. Both these things are connected. Obviously, there is going to be politics involved, but I want to remind you and everybody else that self defense is recognized as an inherent right in the UN Charter. And consequently, there has to be no apology. There cannot be any situation in which the flexibility and the going backwards is only done by one community, that is the Hindu community. And I think the government of India also needs to wake up, because what has happened has been not a very good reflection on the entire apparatus of the government. And they will have to really take a stock of this and take people into account, because this is going to raise the fears, and this can lead to the unraveling of the whole Kashmir story, that peace is returned, that the tourists are back, that investment is flowing in. And that's what they want to do. So it has got to be a whole of society response in which everybody is responsible for something, including organizations and individuals like us, and there are many other people who are working across the world. So a day of protest by Hindus, we are global Hindus, is absolutely in order. That's what I think. But
Thank you.
remember, the danger is steadily increasing.
Thank you, Rahulji. So I'll leave with two thoughts. One is that, Rahulji, it seems like maybe tide is turning a little bit, because several of the countries from the OIC have actually come out and condemned the attack today. So maybe this is the time when Pakistan is getting exposed, and there is hope there. The other thing I would say, as something that will give hope, is, and I know Surinderji probably knows this, but Sudha, you mentioned that the students on campus, and that's very hopeful. I don't know how many people on this panel know this, but in 1990, when Hindu Students Council started, one of the four foundational projects of Hindu Students Council was called Kashmir Awareness Campaign. We published a book on Kashmir terrorism. We, in regularly twice a year, we had camps and a national meeting. So one camp and one national meeting every year. And in both the meetings, we are talking about in 1990 and 91, all the way up to 2000 or even 2002, 2003, twice a year at a national level, we would do educational campaign among college students on Kashmir issue, and those students would then go back to their campuses and present the human rights situation in Kashmir. And we're talking about in US. And that impact of that was felt beyond campuses. And then, of course, as those students went to their professional lives and some of them went into public advocacy and other areas, that seed that we had sown became a tree, and it's spread. So I think there is certainly hope, and that even this generation of Hindu students, college students, will carry forward the important human rights work on US campuses, on the hallways of Congress, in the communities, and everywhere. I don't want to leave this show where everyone remains in a state of, we are all emotionally disturbed, we are all upset that this kind of thing has happened. But I don't want to leave this show by saying that there is no hope. There is hope. There is hope that the Hindu community has certainly awakened in America. Hindu community has awakened in UK, in Canada, in India, everywhere. And Hindu youth are not the ones who are going to just sit by and do nothing. So there's a lot to be done. And I'm not going to say that everything will be accomplished in next week, next 5 days, next month. But the long term hope, I'm hopeful. As an eternal optimist, I'm hopeful that the prognosis is good. Eventually, the dharma will prevail. So, with that, I want to just say thank you everyone for joining. This is Hindu Lounge. Hindu Lounge is brought to you by Hindu Pact. Hindu Pact is Hindu Policy Research and Advocacy Collective. Thank you and namaste.